Futurama is one of the greatest shows of all time. It has some of the most intelligent and witty comedy ever seen on TV, while also legitimately being an insanely creative work of science fiction. While other series have struggled to remain on the air, Futurama is so good that it's managed to get revived on 3 different occasions. I mean, what other show could do that? What other show could possibly—
Shut up and get to the point!
Even though the Futurama we ended up seeing is amazing, the show we got could have been very, very different originally. Like most TV shows, it went through many different designs and ideas while it was being developed, leaving behind a lot of unused concepts. Like for example Fry originally having a sister, Zap and Kif almost having their own spin-off episode, and many other interesting early designs, concept art, and obscure production details confirmed by the series writers on many interviews and audio commentaries. So today, we're gonna be diving into Futurama's early production history, and specifically take a look at unused ideas from its development to see just how differently the show could have been. After the immense success of The Simpsons and it becoming a worldwide pop phenomenon, Matt Groening, the show's creator, slowly started conceptualizing a new potential show for Fox while he was still currently working on The Simpsons. For years, there were rumors that Groening was considering making a new animated show for Fox, but development on a new project didn't start until the late 90s when he approached a series writer from The Simpsons staff named David X. Cohen in order to collaborate with him and start actively developing a new adult animated series. But instead of it being a family sitcom like The Simpsons, it would be a science fiction comedy, and Groening was particularly interested in collaborating with David X. Cohen because he was actually known as the math and sci-fi nerd of The Simpsons writing staff, given that Cohen has a bachelor's degree in physics and also a master's in computer science. And this is actually a pretty cool fact from the show, because Futurama's writing staff is insanely educated, with other writers also having highly academic backgrounds, such as Ken Keeler, who has a PhD in applied mathematics from Harvard and a master's degree in electrical engineering from Stanford, or Jeff Westbrook, who majored in physics and the history of science from Harvard, and also has a PhD in computer science from Princeton. So it's safe to say that the writer's genuine understanding and appreciation of maths and science added great value and substance to the series' writing, and David X. Cohen and Matt Groening's love for sci-fi was specifically crucial for the conception of Futurama. David X. Cohen started working on The Simpsons around the beginning of season 5 in 1993, but he wasn't approached by Matt Groening in order to work on his new animated show until years later during the late 90s, which was around the time that Groening and Cohen started actively conceptualizing this new series for Fox. And it was always meant to be an adult-oriented animated comedy with a science fiction twist. This aspect of the show comes from Matt Groening's and David X. Cohen's sincere love for the sci-fi genre and their understanding of its tropes and themes in a way that they can not only make funny observations about the genre, but their knowledge of it also allowed them to write genuinely intelligent and clever science fiction plots with real emotional and dramatic weight in a lot of the series' greatest episodes. And it all stems from Groening and Cohen being real sci-fi nerds. The show's biggest sci-fi influence is, evidently, Star Trek. Both Groening and Cohen grew up watching the original 1960s series, and they drew a lot of inspiration from the show's iconography and themes. The characters Zap Brannigan and Kif were direct homages to Captain Kirk and Spock from Star Trek. Brannigan was envisioned as if Captain Kirk actually had William Shatner's personality, and another fun fact about him is that the character was originally meant to be voiced by Phil Hartman, a legendary voice actor known for his roles on The Simpsons like Troy McClure and Lionel Hutz. But unfortunately, he couldn't voice Brannigan on Futurama because he tragically passed away in 1998, and so the character was voiced by Billy West instead. and both Sap and Kif luckily went on to become some of the funniest and most iconic characters from the show, cementing its deep connection with Star Trek. Beyond Sap, Kif, and the Democratic Order of Planets, or DOOP, Futurama went on to directly reference and mention Star Trek within the show itself. They also eventually made an entire episode centering around Star Trek, Fry being a huge fan of the series, and they even had a Star Trek reference in the very pilot of the series.
Have a nice future.
Cool, just like in Star Trek.
Oh!
Another character that was born from the writer's love of Star Trek was Zoidberg. The character was imagined by David X. Cohen as an inversion of Dr. McCoy's role in Star Trek, since he thought it would be kinda weird for an alien like Spock to have someone from an entire different species have to medically examine you, and he imagined it'd be funny to have an alien character that doesn't really know anything about human anatomy that has to examine and diagnose human beings. Also, the name itself, Zoidberg, came from a computer game called Zoid that David X. Cohen developed for the Apple II when he was in college. And this might not be very sci-fi, but one of Zoidberg's catchphrases is a reference to Curly from the Three Stooges.
That's the stupidest idea I've ever heard, you imbecile.
Besides Star Trek, David X. Cohen also has gone on the record in multiple interviews saying that his love for science fiction actually came from his mother's very own reading habits, since he started picking up and reading the books that his mother would read and leave lying around the house, with her tastes rubbing onto David since she was also a big science fiction fan, and he cites works like Dune and Stanislaw Lem's Tales of Perks the Pilot as some of the earliest sci-fi books that had an influence on him, and subsequently on Futurama, the works of author Stanislaw Lem were used as inspiration for the show. Specifically, his short story, The 11th Voyage, was used as a basis for the Season 1 episode Fear of a Bot Planet. In the short story, a human astronaut crash lands on an alien planet inhabited by robots that hate humans, and so the astronaut has to disguise himself as a robot, which is exactly like the plot in the Futurama episode, although the ending of the story was changed. Since in the book, the robots were actually revealed to be humans in disguise as well, just like the protagonist, rather than being actual robots like in Futurama. Another scientific influence on the show was actually the 1939 New York World's Fair, where there was an exhibit for a model city designed by Norman Bell Geddes that envisions how a metropolis would possibly look like 20 years into the future. The exhibit was called Futurama, or the City of the Future. And as you can imagine, decades later, Matt Groening and David X. Cohen would use that name for their own sci-fi show. Other names they had considered were Aloha Mars and Doomsville, but they eventually settled on Futurama, and after many long months and hard work conceptualizing the series, Groening and Cohen eventually presented it to Fox executives, and they kinda didn't like it. While they obviously saw the potential in the idea, based on Matt Groening's previous success, and they did greenlit the show in the end, they still had some reservations early on when they were first pitched the series. The network executives were expecting something much more similar to The Simpsons than what they ended up being pitched, but both Matt Groening and David X. Cohen were actively trying to make their new animated show as distinct and separate from The Simpsons as possible, right down to the demographics represented on the show's cast. The Simpsons was a family-centric comedic sitcom set in the suburbs, but Futurama, on the other hand, was envisioned as a workplace comedy filled with young adults set in a futuristic sci-fi city, so they really wanted to make this new series stand out at the time. Beyond that, Fox executives were also kind of disturbed by other elements like Dr. Zoidberg being just so weird, or Bender's antisocial attitudes, or some of the dark comedy in particular, like suicide booths. a concept that was actually inspired by an old 1937 Donald Duck cartoon called Modern Inventions, where Donald Duck gets hurt by using coin-operated machines in a futuristic museum.
The coin-op suicide booth was inspired by a Donald Duck cartoon in which Donald Duck went to a museum of the future and he did all these coin-op devices that injured him.
The season 1 episode, I, Roommate, was actually written in response to the network's criticisms towards the show, creating a more traditional sitcom plot of two friends trying to become roommates and learn to live together. But as the series progressed, the writers were allowed to further explore the show's sci-fi nature with more freedom, crafting a unique identity as a franchise that perfectly balances hilarious comedy, clever writing, and genuinely smart science fiction. However, as mentioned previously, the series we ended up seeing on our screens could have been very different when we take a look at some of its original designs. There have been a number of early concept art that have been shared over the years that show the visual evolution of the show's main cast. Here are some of the original sketches for Bender, and as we can see, the show's artists considered many different robot designs and head shapes with different geometry. One cool detail about his designs is that they revealed that from the very early start, the fact that Bender is a chef and loves cooking was already agreed upon as one of the main funny quirks and characteristics of the character, and a small production detail like this is in reality a true testament to just how well thought out the show was from its very inception. Further Bender designs show him closer to how he ended up appearing in the final series, albeit with some extra antennas, but his design evolution is overall very interesting. Leela is another character that went through a number of different looks before settling on her final design and characterization. Some designs have her eye being more prominent. It's big as hell. The entire idea behind her character came from wanting to play on the classic sci-fi trope of a quote-unquote space babe. Basically, an alien female that looks just like an attractive woman from Earth but with some kind of alien characteristic, like green skin or something. In the case of Leela, they thought it would be funny to give the classic attractive sci-fi girl one big ol' eye, just a big cartoonish goofy looking eye, as a means to give her a comedic character trait that would also later add some depth to the character as it plays into her insecurities and her background as a mutant.
This is the sort of the early sexy version of Leela with the tiny nose. This is based on my original drawing. See, that's my idea of a sexy babe.
Also, the character's name, Turanga Leela, was actually taken from a 1946 symphony composed by Olivier Messiaen. Philip J. Fry is another character that went through an evolution in design and backstory before settling on his final characterization. Despite the show's young adult focus, some early concepts for Fry actually depicted him as being more middle-aged. In an early concept, they considered making him a night watchman for the cryogenics lab. Another idea they considered was making Fry into the captain of the Planet Express crew rather than Leela, but they thought it would be more fitting to each character to have the roles reversed, since Leela is so strong and competent and Fry is an idiot. And while most of his designs had similar hair to how he ended up having on the show, some concept art show him as bald with an antenna on top of his head, which is interesting. Eventually, they settled on his final design with the red jacket, which is actually inspired by James Dean's look in the 50s movie Rebel Without a Cause. Another interesting idea they considered for Fry was pairing him up with a small robot who would travel alongside him inside his pocket and would serve as a means of exposition, a character that could conveniently explain every foreign concept from the future to Fry. But the character was cut since they thought that it would detract from the comedy if Fry was constantly being explained every weird thing that was going on around him. Eventually though, Pocket Pal did end up appearing on Futurama. In the second direct-to-DVD movie, The Beast with a Million Backs, there's a scene where Professor Wernstrom takes out a Pocket Pal and destroys him.
Observe.
Playtime is fun time.
Not this time.
Another cool fact is that the small robot character Andrew is also meant to be an offshoot of Pocket Pal that reutilizes his concept, except with more armed robbery and less explaining. Pocket Pal is just an example of a character or an idea that was planned but ended up being reworked another way. Another example would be the slug that appears on Hermes' head in Season 2's Raging Bender, which, as it was revealed in the episode's DVD commentary, was a gag that was originally meant to last for all of Season 2, and it basically would have been an extension of the gags that appeared in that Season 2 episode, with the slug mind-controlling Hermes and attempting to infect the rest of the Planet Express crew, while the cast don't really take it seriously at all. But in the end, the show's staff decided that it would be funnier to have Hermes act as his normal self, rather than having a monotone, mind-controlled Hermes for an entire season, so they just had this slug joke for that specific episode. On the topic of Hermes, did you know that originally, the character wasn't Jamaican? He wasn't even named Hermes. He was actually called Dexter, and the show's writers didn't really have a clear concept for him, besides being the Planet Express resident bureaucrat. It wasn't until Phil Lamar auditioned for the role and experimented with different voices and takes that they decided on making Hermes Jamaican, and they would later further flesh out the character by giving him more quirks like limbo and smoking, you know, because he loves getting low and he loves getting high. Amy was also originally meant to be more of a tomboy, rather than her vapid, rich girl personality. It wasn't until Leela's character was given a stronger, rougher edge that they decided to scrap the idea of having Amy be a tomboyish character. Scruffy, the Planet Express janitor, was based on Billy Bob Thornton's character in the movie Sling Blade. And a cool fact about Professor Farnsworth is that John DiMaggio had originally auditioned for the role, but the show's staff later decided to ask DiMaggio to use the voice he used for his Farnsworth audition and voice Bender with it instead. Since they were actually having a lot of issues trying to find the correct voice for Bender, there were dozens of actors that auditioned for the role, with even David X. Cohen allegedly having auditioned for the character, since they had told him that his voice sounded kinda robotic. But it just wasn't right. It wasn't until they heard John DiMaggio's take on Professor Farnsworth that they realized he would be perfect to voice a drunk, alcoholic robot like Bender, and Farnsworth ended up being voiced by Billy West. On the topic of the professor, early on, he would say one line in particular pretty frequently.
I am already in my pajamas.
That pajamas line was actually meant to become a recurring catchphrase for the professor, but it just didn't end up happening organically, and the phrase fell out of use. Although the good news line kinda became the professor's true catchphrase through the years.
Good news, multiplayers!
Considering that Fry is the professor's great-granduncle, it's only natural to wonder about the character's Farnsworth last name. And interestingly enough, according to some unused storyboards for planned ideas that were almost included in the original show's pilot, there was a scene where Leela would have revealed to Fry that he has one living relative, and he says that his name is Professor Hubert Farnsworth. To which Fry responds, "So I guess my sister finally married Eddie Farnsworth." This is a very interesting detail, because as we all know, ultimately, Fry didn't end up having a sister in the final show. He did have a brother named Yancey instead, and the name Farnsworth was later revealed to come from David and Philo Farnsworth from the season 6 episode All the President's Heads. But it's still really interesting to know that Fry almost had a sister on the series. Another very interesting scene from the pilot, for which we have storyboards, is a sequence set around the biographic projector, which was a machine owned by the cryogenics lab, where Fry woke up in the pilot that would allow to review a person's entire life and assign them a job for them to work. The person would be connected to a device that resembles a large flat screen, and they would project their entire life by pointing the remote to their heads. In this scene, while Leela is setting up the device, Fry mentions that if she needs any help with the machine's cables, he can give her a hand because he was actually a member of the audiovisual club when he was in high school. And this is a setup for a few moments later when Leela turns on the projector, and right away it shows Fry actually getting rejected by the audiovisual club multiple times. We would also see scenes with a cut character called Dave Borden, Fry's high school counselor, who showed concern for Fry when he was young. After evaluating Fry's life, the projector would determine that he's a loser, and that his ideal profession is being a delivery boy, which did happen in the final pilots, but the biographic projector was changed for the probulator instead. Another cool thing is that the projector would have also briefly shown Fry chilling in his house, watching The Simpsons on the living room TV, which is really cool, and technically stands as the first of many times that these shows have referenced each other. Even though this scene was cut from the pilot, the final episode still ended up having a Simpsons cameo by showing a three-eyed fish. And the series, of course, would go on to have multiple different Simpsons references throughout the years. And likewise, The Simpsons would also go on to have multiple Futurama references itself, eventually leading into the 2014 special crossover, Simpsorama. Getting back to the series pilot, there were other interesting cut characters from the first episode, such as a random night watchman from the cryogenics lab, some random teens, Boris Yeltsin's head, In the pilot, there was going to be this joke originally, where Fry and Bender would have seen the ex-president of Russia, Boris Yeltsin, on the head museum, and Bender would actually drink from Boris Yeltsin's head jar, as if it was alcohol, because it probably was. Janet was also the original name and design for Fry's girlfriend, but the character's concept would later morph into Michelle. Of course, the series pilot isn't the only instance where we can find cut characters from Futurama, and there are other rejected characters we could have seen. As we've mentioned, there are some instances when the show's staff had to cut various scenes for different reasons, like production time and pacing of the episode, and they can be scrapped at different stages in production. Some concepts never go beyond simply being ideas in the writer's head, and they never executed the idea. But other times, the ideas and characters get all the way to being storyboarded, and sometimes even fully animated before getting their scenes deleted. One such minor character cut from the show was Jacques Jambon, a random Frenchman selling ham on the streets.
Jacques! Nibbler got loose. Have you seen him?
If I see that little thief who steal my ham every day, I'll make him into ham. So, how many ham you want?
This was a deleted scene from The Day the Earth Stood Stupid. And as I said, there's actually many different deleted scenes from many different episodes of the show. These have been included in DVD releases of Futurama and have been uploaded onto YouTube for the most part. A lot of the scenes aren't that different to how the episodes ended up being, just with different lines and jokes, but some scenes are pretty interesting, albeit inconsequential. Another very interesting cut character from the show is one that didn't go far beyond the planning stage. The season 6 episode Law and Oracle focuses on Fry joining the police academy and working for the Future Crimes Division, a department that catches criminals before they commit crimes with a technology similar in concept to Minority Report. And the episode is a nice sci-fi parody. But originally, the episode was conceived as an attempt to make one of David X. Cohen's most difficult episode ideas that he had been trying to write for years at that point. In a 2014 Reddit AMA, David X. Cohen described an episode he conceived with Josh Weinstein for a story involving a character moving backwards in time, and in the audio commentary for Law and Oracle, David X. Cohen described that the season 6 episode was ultimately birthed from this story about a man moving backwards in time who would encounter the present-day Planet Express crew asking for their help. And the episode would have revealed that the mystery man was actually the son of Fry and Leela displaced from the future, confirming that they would end up having children eventually. Ultimately though, the episode was reworked into the more straightforward parody that Law and Oracle ended up becoming, mainly because they felt like the original concept for the cancelled episode was too sad and depressing rather than being funny. Another cut character from Law and Oracle was Connor Obocop, a retired cyborg police officer that parodies RoboCop and who would have had a speech in the police academy until his programming malfunctioned. His scene was storyboarded, but ultimately scrapped from the episode. Regarding that, David X. Cohen Reddit AMA in response to a fan asking him whether they ever considered making a Futurama spin-off of some kind. David X. Cohen responded that they've actually attempted on several occasions to make an episode completely focused on Sap and Kif, describing it as a Star Trek-style episode that would follow Sap and Kif on a mission, and they would only briefly run into the Planet Express crew in passing as a cameo, with them even wanting to make a new version of the opening credits to make it feel even more special. But ultimately, the episode idea was never made because they couldn't quite figure out the story for it. And this is a huge shame in my opinion, because Sap and Kif are some of the show's funniest characters, and the pairing does have a spin-off potential if done properly. Another rejected episode we never got to see was a story idea called Nights of the Automated Dead, where a disease would spread around New York, causing a robot zombie epidemic. The idea was conceived by writer Eric Rogers, who originally pitched it to David X. Cohen, but he didn't like it enough to make it into an episode, and so ultimately, it was turned into an issue of the Futurama comics released in November 2014. So at least the concept got to be executed in some way. Besides cancelled episodes that never got to be made, there are also a number of episodes we did get to see, but that had very different ideas originally that were ultimately scrapped. For example, Jurassic Bark is one of the show's most emotionally resonant and relatable episodes that's become a classic among fans, but originally they had considered focusing the episode around Fry's mom rather than his dog Seymour. An idea that was passed on because they considered it to be too depressing, and Fry's relationship with his mother would ultimately be the focus of a future season 7 episode, Game of Tones. I Dated a Robot was originally named J-Lo Dolly, meaning that it would have most likely featured Jennifer Lopez rather than Lucy Liu as the robot's image. Season 6 Reincarnation was originally titled Resurrection, and they considered animating one of the episode segments in claymation, but decided against it due to cost issues. Hubert was originally meant to be introduced in the episode A Great Big Garbage and become a series regular afterwards, appearing in most episodes and pointing out logical inconsistencies with the episode's plots. But he was shelved and introduced later in the episode A Clone of My Own. Flexo was meant to appear in the episode Crimes of the Hot. The robot God was meant to appear in Season 1's Hell is Other Robots, but ended up appearing in the Season 6 episode Ghost in the Machines. Speaking of robots, in an early draft for the episode A Fistful of Dollars, Fry would have bought a luxurious new robot named Deluxor, who would have been handcrafted, made of exotic wood, but they didn't use this idea in the end, and later on in the episode Obsoletely Fabulous, we did get to see robots made of wood. In the audio commentary for the show's second episode, The Series Had Landed, it was said by the writers that the original cold open would have featured the original captain of the Planet Express crew, who would have gotten angry with the new members, and he would have left pissed off, storming out of the office, and would have actually died right after, but the idea was considered to be too dark. Although the show would continue to make jokes about the professor's downright murderous negligence and the previous deceased crew members.
This mission is incredibly dangerous. Someone's sure to be killed. Fry, Leela, Bender. Damn you, old man!
And I wanted to talk about one character in particular, whose entire concept is a reference to an old scrapped idea that the show's writers had conceived when they were originally designing the show. This old guy with a 9 on his shirt was placed in multiple background shots in various episodes of the first few seasons of Futurama, and he was originally meant to represent a fictional caste system where people would have numbers that would assign their place in the social hierarchy, meaning that people with low numbers would be basically slaves and people with high numbers masters. But ultimately, this piece of world building they had thought of was abandoned and wasn't included in the final show. Years later, the character would be given a speaking role in the movie Into the Wild Green Yonder, where he was depicted as a leader of a small secret society. After over 25 years, Futurama has proven to be one of the most clever and sharply written adult animated series ever created. And the fact that it has been revived 3 different times out of sheer fan willpower is insane. As a lot of you know, the series originally ran on Fox from 1999 until 2003, with it being sadly cancelled at the time. However, it lived on through reruns on Adult Swim, and thanks to its high subsequent ratings and high DVD sales, the show was brought back for a series of 4 direct-to-DVD movies, which proved to be successful enough for the series to be picked up for a new season from Comedy Central in 2009, and it was later renewed once again for another season by the network, which ended in 2013. But recently, as a lot of you also probably know, Futurama has been brought back for an 8th season on Hulu, which is currently airing at the time of me making this video. So the show simply cannot be stopped, and because of this tumultuous history, Futurama technically has 4 finales. Season 4's The Devil's Hands Are Idle Playthings, the DVD movie Into the Wild Green Yonder, Season 6's Overclockwise, and Season 7's Meanwhile, all of which are absolutely fantastic and emotionally effective stories, and I'm sure that when it comes to time for the show's writers to come up with a new Futurama finale, it'll also probably be yet another fantastic sci-fi story, and I'm honestly enjoying the new episodes that are coming out on Hulu. Episode 10 especially, which revolved around simulations, had a very interesting concept and execution. And look, I'll admit that the original run and the first early Fox seasons is my absolute favorite era of Futurama's history. I just think that its comedy is brilliant, and it's one of the TV shows with the sharpest comedic writing in all of history. But I don't say this to discredit how good the revival seasons and the more modern episodes of Futurama are, because the quality of the show has honestly always been great, and as long as the writer's passion for Futurama's world is still there, I will also be there to watch whatever new stories they come up with. And I'd honestly love to see some of the scrapped ideas that they rejected over the years. The Sap and Kif spin-off episode especially is an idea that I think has a lot of potential. But those are only my thoughts. Now I'd love to know, what do you think about all of these cancelled Futurama concepts and ideas? Would you have also liked to see a Sap and Kif episode, or an episode with robot zombies? Are there any other cool unused ideas from Futurama that you know about, and that I forgot to include in this video? And what are you thinking of the new Hulu episodes so far? Please, let me know what you think in the comments below, and as always, thank you so much for watching.